We have a challenge of the poor pay of the journalists. I don't want to say that only journalists that report from Parliament are well off, but you'll see that we also have journalists that are not well off. Because the journalists are not paid by Parliament, but they're paid by the different media associations. And you'll see that a journalist is paid per story. Some of the media houses do that. And the journalist is being paid 2,000, 5,000 per story, depending on the media strength of the media house. So we believe that we need an intervention by Parliament and also by government to ensure that this issue is addressed. Last year, all of us saw what happened in Kawempe. Most of my colleagues have talked about it, but we believe that as we're heading for the 2026 general elections, we believe we can have an engagement with government, with the different security organs, and with the Electoral Commission to see that what transpired in Kawempe does not happen again in the 2026 general elections. We believe journalists are supposed to do their work without intimidation, without fear, and objectively they will be able to do their work. But once you pressurize, once you intimidate journalists, once you put them in the state of fear, or cases where members of the public also get involved in harassing members of the media when they are doing their work. We believe it's high time also to start engaging them and also start sensitizing the public to understand the role of media, that media plays a very vital role. And when media is blocked from doing its work, then the country may face doom, because information is power. And once we say information is power, we believe that the public can make judgment whether after getting the information. So when you give them wrong information, when you give them some good, positive information, the public will be able to judge and make positive decision or for what they think their community look like, families, districts, and then the country. So let's provide an opportunity to see that the public is given information to make the rightful decision in terms of choosing their leaders, especially when we are approaching the 2026 general polls.
That editors are intimidated, journalists are intimidated, reporters are intimidated. You saw what happened in Kawempe. You're beaten like small balls and then summoned to UCC to train you on what you learned in journalism school. Who has a better creed of training journalists? That now the Uganda Communications Commission can summon journalists and tell them the do's and don'ts when picking stories. I find that ridiculous. That's the context in which we operate right now. A journalist is trained in journalism school to know who to interview, to know when to capture a story, to know to uphold the principles of integrity, the principles of fairness, the principles of honesty, and the principles of balance. So instead, UCC should visit journalism schools in universities and learn how journalists are trained, rather than call journalists and eventually call them to Chankwanzi for ideological orientation. Journalists are supposed to be objective, never once pushed to one side of ideology, never once pushed to one side of a political dispensation. Journalists are supposed to keep society in one act.
Maybe they should begin by writing their wills. I mean, you see, the Constitution has been overthrown. Serwan spoke about Edumutwe. And Museveni's son said, I am going to castrate him. He is in basement learning in Runyankore. So here, right, your wills, we go and see whether we will survive, because it's going to be hell. I mean, if in a by-election 2 kilometers from the state center, people can be beaten the way they were beaten. I remember 2005, 2006 election, the Honorable Livingstone Okero was representing Chua. he was beaten, his people were beaten, but he's far away. He told his story after election. So really where we are now, I think we all prepare for the worst because it will happen.
It reminds us that press freedom is not just a privilege to be granted by those in power, but a right to be upheld, protected, and exercised by all in a democratic society. So I want to appreciate the Uganda Parliamentary Press Association for organizing this event and bringing us together to talk about these critical issues of concern. Ladies and gentlemen, democracy cannot exist in the dark. It demands scrutiny, transparency, and public participation. And the press is the torchbearer of that light, informing citizens, amplifying voices, holding leaders accountable, and exposing abuse of power. In Uganda, the media has played a vital role in every major political event, from election reporting to exposing corruption, to covering stories from forgotten communities and so on. Journalists have time and again been the conscience of our nation. The reality is, the media in Uganda is under siege, and we must confront this uncomfortable truth. The Kawempe North by-election is a recent bothersome example. Journalists covering that electoral process were subjected to abduction, beatings, harassment, arbitrary arrests, and violent intimidation. Equipment such as cameras were confiscated, access to polling stations was obstructed, and many were physically assaulted, including some in this room today. Their only crime is doing their job as journalists. Unfortunately, the Electoral Commission, and I'm happy my brother Julius is here, the Electoral Commission, which was in charge of this exercise, has up until now not showed the intention to see that the violators of this electoral process are called to order. I waited for a scathing statement from the Electoral Commission. I know that they did not deploy these people to beat up journalists and our candidate and other political actors, but I thought that the Electoral Commission, which is in charge, should have come out. And journalists, Julius being a journalist, maybe he should have come out a lot more.